Okay, so hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever works for you. Welcome to the third and last session of our online workshop, Indian Religions and the Concept of God. I'm Ricardo Silvestri, and I'll be chairing today's session again. So this workshop is part of a research project entitled Philosophical Approach to the Vaishnava Concept of God, which is hosted by the Brazilian Association for the Philosophy of Religion in collaboration with the Logic and Religion Association. The project is funded by the John Templeton Foundation through the Global Philosophy of Religion project, which is hosted by the University of Birmingham. The workshop is also related to a special issue of the journal Sophia on the same theme, Indian Religions and the Concept of God, which is being edited by me, Alan Herbert, who is here, and Purushottam Abhili Moria. So in this session, we are going to have 4 speakers. David Lawrence is going to speak about the concept of God in late non-dual Kashmiri Śaivism. Then Christopher Chappell speaking about panentheism in the Bhagavad Gita. Alan Herbert is speaking about the Gaudiya Vaishnava concept of God, and Johannes Bronkhorst speaking about religion's disbelief in classical India. So each talk will last 40 minutes, including discussion. As we have 4 talks, today we have to be a bit more rigorous with time so that each talk will really last 40 minutes at most. And we advise speakers to speak within 20-25 minutes so that we have a good time for discussion. Okay, so with further ado, let's begin our session with Professor Lawrence's talk. So David Lawrence works in the fields of Hindu and Buddhist religion and philosophy, non-dual Shaivism and Tantra, Sanskrit, intercultural philosophy of religions, history of religion, psychology of religions, and mysticism. He's currently a visiting professor at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies of the University of Nairobi and a professor at the Department of Philosophy and Religion of the University of North Dakota. His publications include The Teachings of the Odd-Eyed One, 2008, and Rediscovering God with Transcendental Argument, a contemporary interpretation of monist Kashmiri Shaiva philosophy, 1999, both published by State University of New York Press. The title of his talk is The Philosophical Concept of God in Late Non-Dual Kashmiri Shaivism. Professor Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very delighted to participate in this workshop, and I'm honored to have been invited. Let me say a couple of things first. I start at the University of Nairobi next year. I just put that in the list. And another thing is that because of health problems I've been having, I have these facial spasms, and I have some nasality in my voice. And if anybody cannot understand me or anything I say, I don't mind being interrupted. I would prefer that so that I can communicate well.
But it's really fine. We can understand you very well.
Well, thank you. I'll try my best. Okay, I'll start. In late non-dual Kashmiri Shaivism, there is a profusion of personal forms of divinity, besides the diverse forms of the supreme male divinity, Parameshvara, Shiva, Ishvara, Sadashiva, and different Bhairavas. There are numerous modalities of Shakti. The 3 main Trika goddesses, Hara, Parapara, and Apara, the triadic variations of those, such as Icha, Jnana, and Kriya Shaktis, also a pentad of Chin, Ananda, Icha, Jnana, and Kriya Shaktis, 12 or more Kalis in Krama practices, a supervening Krama goddess, Kala Sankarshini, or Matri Sadbhava. There are also Matrikas, Yoginis, and so on. The emphasis on modalities of Shakti is a reason why this broad stream of tradition is also called Shakta Shaivism. These deities all have mythic, gendered, contemplative, or we can say theosophical and philosophical or theological meanings. Advancing initiatives of Vasugupta, Kalata, and especially his own teacher, Somananda, Utpalaneva, in the 10th century, about the 10th century, created the originary verses and commentaries of the Pratyabhijna philosophical theology of late Nondual Shaivism. Abhinavagupta is famous for brilliant and erudite commentaries on Utpalaneva's writings and for the creation of a vast and influential corpus of philosophical hermeneutics, itself comprising both of poetics and exegetics of tantric symbolism and ritual. As David White has argued, the philosophical hermeneutics of Abhinavagupta and his followers had a profound influence not only on non-dual Shaivism, but on, I think, most later Tantra. It had a profound influence in reducing devotions for modalities of gods or Shaktis to abstract philosophical ideas. Shankar Vishwalinga has entitled his long ongoing research project, Abhinavagupta and the Synthesis of Indian Culture, granting the great diversity of what is called Hinduism. This title suggests that Abhinavagupta articulates in a rather demythologized form predominant features of South Asian religion. Sri Aurobindo, other Hindu Renaissance and global perennialist retrievals of Hindu non-dualism, theism, as well as the balancing of transcendence and immanence, often called panentheism, have taken the Vedic Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita as the most authoritative expressions of the religion. Amidst their own multivocality, the Upanishads, of course, are not always, but I think most frequently non-dualistic. However, they comprise some disagreements or ambivalence about whether Brahman is more personal or a god. Mythical ritual narratives are philosophized and somewhat toned down in the Upanishads. But in my view, Pache Shankaracharya, these texts do tend to conceive the Atman or Brahman as an omnipotent agent. That is an abstract sort of superperson, or I think we can say God, present within the world of nature. Although there is also great sectarian controversy about the Gita, this text reveals a narratively quite situated personal God. At moments, Vishnu or Krishna also seems non-dual as conceived by the Upanishads. Is this a qualified non-dualism? Some think so. And of course, Krishna is worshipped through worldly dharma. In non-renunciation, anthropologist T.N. Manan has argued that the Gita provides a classic Hindu reconciliation of a basic cultural polarity between worldly life and a renunciation that pursues identity with or an intimate absorption in a deity or supreme self. Late non-dualist Shaivism continues the mentioned dominant tendencies of the Upanishads and the Gita with the philosophical systematicity of the 10th century and after of the Abhinavagupta often cites the Upanishads, and he wrote a commentary directly on the Gita. The non-dual Shaivas forthrightly affirm a God identical with one's own self, who generates the world through emanation of himself, Srishti. The Prativigya project of demonstrating identity with the divine self is at the outset, situated within a context of what has been called givenness, based on two metaphysical features of the ultimate. The first is that of God or the self as non-dual and therefore self-luminous, meaning svaprakasha and so on. The second feature of givenness is that of the Shiva self as a theistic super person, we can say, emancipating through grace, anugraha, or shaktipat. Traditions of givenness and associated apophasis are found throughout South Asia, with examples as diverse as the Nasadiya Sukta, Upanishadic negations of intentionality and Namarupa, the dialogue between the Buddha and Bhattacharya, skepticism and nirgunatva in Hindu and Buddhist scholastic philosophies, and variations of nirgunatva in Bhakti traditions. As elsewhere, Shaiva preclusions of conceptual and ritual approaches to Parameshvara do not prevent all positive approaches, but in a sense dialectically qualify them. Besides denying means of realization and expression about Shiva in the non-means or anupaya, Abhinavagupta propounds a great diversity of these means. We now turn to late non-dual Shaiva philosophical ideas and contemplative practices. In non-dual Shaivism, as in many Hindu understandings of male deities, wait a second, I lost my place. Shiva is the Shaktiman, possessor of Shakti, encompassing her within his androgynous nature as his integral consort and potency. According to, according to predominant non-dual Shaiva cosmogony and metaphysics, which I and others have called pantheistic, Shiva, out of a kind of flame, divides himself from Shakti or her modalities, and then in sexual union emanates, embodies himself within, and controls the universe through her. Shakti is also identified with the principle of supreme speech, paravak, derived from the linguistic philosopher Bhartrihari, and thereby its Shakti as paravak is articulated in linguistic, or we can say semiotic, signifiers and their reference. One may contrast this account of non-dual Shaivism with Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta Satkaryavada ascribes to Brahman material causality. However, that tradition does not, like the Upanishads, the Gita, and non-dual Shaivism, accept agency in the Nirguna Brahman. It is also deeply ambivalent about the locus and ontological status of Maya and the world. In any event, the basic non-dual Shaiva ritual process of return to the source is the recapitulation of the cosmogony. Thus, the approach to Shiva is through Shakti. This is called the disclosure of Shakti, Shakti Avishkarana. The same pattern is articulated in philosophical, theological, mythic, and practical terms. Late Nondual Shaiva philosophy and philosophized ritual subsumes all worldly experience, ritual accessories, and in the philosophy, intellectual explicanda within Parameshvara Shakti. The publicly intelligible inference, Parartha Anumana, is I am Shiva because I have Shakti. Shakti is conceived as the reason in this inference. We should pause a moment to reflect on what all this means. Outside of narratives and contemplative, or what I call theosophical symbolism, the philosophical meaning of Shakti is the capacity or potentiality, or to combine both of these ideas, I think, the potency of the non-dual panentheistic self. Ancient Neoplatonic, I'm introducing a few terms, ancient Neoplatonic, Platonic, Neoplatonic, and Aristotelian metaphysical reasoning for unity may be described with the Neoplatonic term genealogical, looking for unity. Reasoning about the practical outcomes of potentiality may be described as phronesis, which Aristotle thematized, but Plato also mentioned. In recent years, I've been interested in the thought of Charles Peirce for its pansemioticism, pragmatism, and even, as scholars Peirce have described it, his panentheism. Peircean, he's influenced by Schelling. He has a kind of rudimentary philosophy of religion, you can say, amidst everything else. Peircean philosophical argument for a metaphysical unitary continuum is called cynicism. Theorization on potentiality is described as tychism. Building on Peirce's tychism, philosophical theologian Robert Neville has observed, I won't go into all his complexities, but Neville has observed how Abrahamic doctrines of creation, Hindu emanationism, and other Asian traditions all view cosmogony as the generation of actuality from a sort of indeterminate potentiality. Anyway, for Peirce, practical reasoning about the consequences of potentiality is called abduction. I'm not going into issues about whether abduction is separate from deduction or induction, or what Abhinavagupta says about orthopathy, which seems to have a more limited scope. Whether abduction is the same as a kind of mixture or a mixture of induction and deduction, or whether it's separate, there is a kind of practical inference, a kind of practical reason. And that's all I'm talking about. I'm not worried about classifying that. All these analogical concepts assist us in understanding the late non-dual Shaiva philosophy of God. I should say something about vocabulary. There are three sets of terms the Shaivism use to articulate their philosophy of recognition. The first set of terms are words like pratyabhikya and abhigya, which are usually straightforwardly translated as something like recognition. And then all these terms have then there are two other sets of terms. There's derivatives from the verb root mrish, like vimarsha, paramarsha, pratyabhamarsha, amarsha, and so on. And then there are also derivatives from the prefix sam and the verb root da. Anusandhana, pratisandhana, abhisandhi, and so on. All these terms have a complicated philosophical and linguistic and religious background before the Pratyabhijna system. But in this system, they're closely interrelated. They're actually defined in terms of each other. Sometimes Abhinavagupta says Pratyabhijna is Vimarsha or Pratyabhimarsha or Anusandhana. And they're used as equivalents of each other. And they're distinguished from each other. And they're not 100% identical. They're distinguished from each other when they want to say, well, when there's not A, there's still B. Like when there's not Pratyabhijna, there's still Vimarsha or something like that. So in my glosses, I gloss the Mrish terms as recognitive apprehension, which I think apprehension conveys some epistemological idea and it's sort of vague. And I gloss the Sandha terms like Anusandhana as recognitive synthesis. So putting everything together, the Pratyabhijna epistemology, henologically and in phronesis or abduction, explains Shakti or potency as unifying and idealistically constitutive self-recognition, recognitive apprehension, or recognitive synthesis. So I hope that, okay, Shaiva epistemology is organized in chapters and articles of theorization on a triad of Shaktis derived from Bhagavad Gita 15:15. That is chapters on Jnana, Smriti, and Apohana. In the case of Jnana, the Shaivas argue that all cognition derives from the unifying recognitive operations of all these terms I described, and their associated semiosis, my translation of Shabdana. These unifications are all inseparable from awareness, prakasha. In the case of memory, the Shaivas show that Smriti depends on a unifying apprehension that confirms past objects of experience as things which are a past that, tad, rather than a present this, inam. Third, the Shaivas interpret the Gita's Apohana. I've heard different explanations of what the Gita meant, but I'm not concerned with that right now. The Shaivas interpret the Gita's Apohana in the context of Nignaga's and Dharmakirti's understanding of semantic reference as exclusion, apoha. They contend that the Buddhist interpretation, this is a classic example, the Buddhist interpretation of cow as meaning not non-cow, that this depends on a synthetic intuition of what does and does not fit within a category. In the summation of Utpalaneva on epistemology, he says there would be destroyed the whole situation or worldly life of humanity, stinty, which are born from the recognitive synthesis of cognitions that are different from each other and do not have knowledge of one another, if there were not the great Lord who contains within the endless forms of the universe, is unitary, and has the nature of consciousness and possesses jnana, smriti, and apohana shaktis. Okay, now on ontology. Theologies or religious philosophy commonly explain the configuration of existence through narrative, or what I've described as narrative ontology. Non-Jewish Shaivas also less conceive expressed action as the chief penological category of their ontology. When Paladeva recounts a philosophical narrative of how an essential non-duality emanates the multiplicity of the world. I'll skip reading that for the sake of time. Potentialistically, we can say, or tankistically, the primal unity's capacity for the generation of multiplicity is the Kriya Shakti. And I'll skip the quote where Amitabha describes this in somewhat, it's from a benedictory verse of a chapter on this, and he describes it in sort of poetic terms. Basing themselves on Vyakarna, the non-Jewish Shaivas' chief theoretical interpretation of the Kriya Shakti is as agency, kartritva, or svatantriya, particularly of the first grammatical person, Uttama Purusha. Of course, they number them differently in Sanskrit, but we won't worry about that. They contend that the first person is the quintessential grammatical person. They likewise argue that the agent, the karta, is the grammatical locus. Okay, the agent is the grammatical locus and potent instigator, or potent or tankistic instigator, prayojika of the overall arching process of action, vyapara ashraya. This overall, the agent organizes all the other parts of an action to accomplish the overall action. The overall process of action includes the reification and constituent vyaparas of other karakas, or action factors. It may be added that just as we can understand, ontology in a sense always encompasses epistemology because knowing is a kind of reality. And for the Shaivas, that reality is action. But at the same time, ontology depends on epistemology. We have to know in order to identify what is real. Avinavagupta explains agency as itself a potency. He says, the Shakti of agency, which has the nature of lordship, subsumes all the Shaktis. That Shakti has the nature of recognitive apprehension, remorsion. The Supreme Lord, who has the nature of awareness, makes his own self into an object of cognition, even though it is not an object of cognition, because the cognizer is unitary. That's what the Upanishads were saying all the time. They don't describe it in this manner. Therefore, by reason of his agency, continuing with Abhinavagupta, characterized as the Shakti that is recognitive apprehension, as he recognitively apprehends himself, so because everything is contained within him, he appears as objects such as blue and so on. Analyzing things more abstractly. In action, an entity changes from comprising the existence of feature A and the non-existence of B to the non-existence of A and the existence of B. So now my hand, can you see my hand? Has the existence of being a little bit over to my left or your right, and now it has it's a little over to my right or your left. So the leftness and rightness are becoming existent and non-existent. The Shaivas argue that the agent consciously unifies this existence and non-existence. So bringing everything together, the relation of, we identify in metaphysics or ontology, the relation of cause and effect in this philosophized syntax is nothing but the relation of the agent and its results in the karma, karka, the karta and the karma. Look, Baladeva explains, but that Kriya Shakti, which is existence, Sata, of which is the existence of both the existent and the non-existent, does not belong to the insentient. Therefore, the karya-karna relation has the nature of only the kartri-karma relation. Within their encompassing in ontology of generative action, the Shaivas also describe unifications statically as relations, sambandha, universals, samanya, and manifestations which connect with particular words, abhasa, the words, that's manifestation. In philosophical psychology, the Shaivas had described how the ahankara and other features of psychophysiology operate as a sort of worldly, we can say in Kantian terms, unifying synthesizer of apperception. But that worldly unification in worldly cognition is a kind of image or figuration of the ultimate unity of Shiva and his Purna Ahanta, his perfect Iha. As the late Nondual Shaiva text Virupaksha Panchashika says, the wise verily say that lordship, universal agency, swatantriya, and agential self-determination, you can say, and being of the nature of consciousness are synonyms for Iha, this higher Iha. Although it has earlier Upanishadic and Tantric backgrounds, Michel Ulan and Mark Diskowski have demonstrated the historical innovativeness of this concept of divine egoity and its great influence on later tantric traditions. Aesthetics. The rasas are the universalized forms, again, it's sort of heliological, of different emotions, and not by any kind of platonic participation, and tracing them to their ultimate source, leads to Shantarasa or Svatma Asvada, to self-relishing, or Svatma Ananda or Chamatkara of the absolute Parameshvara self, we can say. To understand the relations between the non-Shaiva, I have to hurry up, divine self and the material world, we can get interpretive help from later Persian conceptions of semiosis. And I just tried to show that in later Persian philosophy, after Perse, in the area called biosemiotics, they begin with an understanding of life as self-organizing systems, but they explain the self-organization in terms of information and science. And so all the systems and all the interpretation is evolving greater strategies of interacting, of adapting to the environment. And this one theorist in biosemiotics argues that, the ultimate part, the direction of this tendency in evolution is towards the realization of agency. And so I think this is another way of thinking about the process of Shakti Avishkarna, or unification, or what was the other word? The demonstration in the philosophy of Kartrika. So there's a kind of natural teleology towards agency, which I think can continue ideas of Shakti, of Ishkarna, even into the realm of biology. So I hope that I've given you some idea of how I understand the significance of late Nondual Kashmiri Shaiva philosophical ideas of God. Thank
you. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have time for questions, and I have one. I have one question. Well, at some point you use the word panentheism, right?
Yeah.
And at other point you explain, say, the relation that ourselves, Atmas, Jivas, whatever they have with God, Shiva. You said that something like, I am Shiva because I'm Shakti. It seems that you said something like that. So I was wondering about the relation between Shiva, God, and Shakti. More specifically, the ontological status of Shakti, because it's a term which seems to me has a lot of meanings, and it's a word that is used in many different ways. So if you think, I mean, perhaps that's my question, perhaps, can we somehow relate the Shaiva concept of God with Ramanuja's panentheism? Because he doesn't use the word Shakti, but some people translate as aspect, that above ourselves and in the world, there are aspects of God, and there's the body, soul analogy. So if you could elaborate a bit on that, more specifically about what really Shakti is in relation to God.
Okay, well, I'll first say something about panentheism. I've been thinking about this since the 80s, and I don't agree with all the discussions of panentheism, because they act like it's some kind of new doctrine combining a lot of people act like it's some kind of new doctrine combining transcendence and immanence. And I think that ideas, or even non-theistic religious ideas of the ultimate, virtually always have both transcendence and immanence. This one scholar of African philosophy of religion, John Mbiti, he makes this point. They have to be combined, because if God is completely transcendent, he's not accessible. If he's completely immanent, he's not God anymore. And so the ultimate has to, to me, an ultimate has to be transcendent. And for us to know or have any relation with it, that ultimate has to be immanent. I think what's really distinctive about panentheism is a special kind of emphasis on balancing in some way or other these different polarities. What is Shakti? To be honest, I think that the Shaivas are not completely clear, because when they talk about non-duality, well, I mean, I think that there is a lot of similarities to Ramanuja, but I mean, their official doctrine is they're non-dualists. But when the idea, it's sort of like the idea of potentiality. We can talk about a non-dual entity as having the capacity to become dual or do this or that. Just saying it's the capacity is not a contradiction. Like, I have the capacity to do different things, to mow the lawn or cook dinner or whatever. But, I don't have to do them all at the same time. So I think that sometimes they sound like they're talking of unity, and sometimes they're speaking in more dualistic terms. And Abhinavagupta himself acknowledges that they have a problem explaining the relation of, I don't remember where right now, but it's in the Kriya Adhikara, they have a problem explaining the relation of unity and multiplicity. And I honestly think they cannot solve it. And I think they're faced with a kind of paradox or contradiction. But I don't think they're alone in that. I think many philosophical systems also have how can you qualify non-dualism? If seen a non-dual, I think many philosophical systems have that same problem. And I don't think the Shaivism really solve it. That's my opinion. Shakti is a capacity to become something. But that's how I look at it.
Yeah, but when we say, as you said, that we are Shakti, so it's not a capacity anymore, it's actuality, right?
It's both. If you read the hymns like Utpaladeva or Abhidhamma devotional hymns, they sound very dualistic, and there's something else going there. In this givenness I talk about, you have the unification of Swaprakashatva and other synonyms with Anugraha and so on. And I think that those two are very related in the Shaiva system. And I don't want to return to old-fashioned history of religions of looking for, similarities around the world and say, therefore, there's some truth. But they seem to me, lots of descriptions of grace also involve descriptions of light. And, it's very interesting. Even Thomas Aquinas says that grace is light. So I don't know, I don't know. So I think that they don't solve the problem of the women and men.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have some more questions. Ruth, please.
Yes, David, thank you very much. When you were just saying something about panentheism, you finished with a remark saying that all forms of panentheism ultimately rely on, and I missed that word.
Oh, I don't remember exactly what word that was. I think, I don't know if it's all, but most religions include transcendence and immanence. If it's only transcendent, we would know nothing about it or have no relation to it. If it's only immanent, like my grandmother was a very ideological atheist, and she was a member of this, organization you probably have heard of called Ethical Culture. And she would say, "Oh, I believe in the world, and if you want to call that God, then the world is my God."
I think maybe panentheism can be explained with the metaphor of the dream. If you're in a dream, then the dreamer is completely transcendent. Yet it is a condition for the dream. And in a way, you could also say that the dream does not exist of anything other than the dreamer. So the dreamer is immanent in the dream in that sense. And it's a very qualified sense, I think. But, a dreamer related to dream could stand for God related to life or the world.
Gupta uses analogies or metaphors also, like a unifying vista from the top of a mountain or a mirror or something like that. And I think that philosophers often use, Gupta uses metaphors when he's explaining this, and even Plato does. I think that philosophers often use metaphors because they can't entirely explain it. And philosophically, I could say it's like a dream. But
we can skip the metaphor and say, I am consciousness.
Yeah.
And all else is content of consciousness. Then we skip the metaphor and we talk directly. Same thing.
So is the content, why, I don't know. How do we know the content of consciousness is nothing but consciousness?
the content, I'm not saying that the content of consciousness, I think by definition, the content of consciousness is in consciousness, right? Doesn't exist in any other sense.
Well, the content of a box is not identical with the box. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think all this is wrong. I hope I can convey that. I just think that lots of philosophies have insoluble problems.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may interject, there's a big issue, people trying to define properly panentheism. So it's funny because in contemporary philosophy, I mean, people are discussing a lot panentheism, but I don't know, I don't know of the discussion is about what panentheism is. Some people defend that it's not.
All is in God.
And so on and so forth.
That's literally what the word means, right? I mean, how it's like with philosophy. If I say that's the love of wisdom, then everybody declares me crazy. But I think that's just a literal meaning.
Yeah. Some people say that this is a kind of motto, that panentheism, the literal meaning of the word, right? That
God contains everything.
Yeah, that the word it's in God, but from a philosophical point of view, we want more. We want some more details. Anyway, this was just a comment. Jonathan is patiently waiting for his turn. So please, Jonathan.
Hi, David. Thanks for a great talk again. You mentioned pratyabhijna. This is another kind of comparative question. Many years ago, I was talking with John Nemec about the doctrine of, John Nemec works on Shaivism as well, about pratyabhijna. We were talking about the Gaudiya doctrine of viraha. And this is a doctrine that there's a kind of longing of the self to know God and to be with God. Do you think there's any parallels? And we talked about doing some kind of study, cross-comparative study of this. So do you think there's any similarities there with the doctrine of pratyabhijna, in the sense that Shiva separates out himself into individual souls so that those individual souls can recognize themselves as Shiva? Is it ever framed in Abhinava or any of the others as a kind of longing of Shiva to know himself through this creation of difference within himself?
I'm not entirely sure. It wouldn't explain it exactly that way. But there are influences and there are parallels between the Shaivas and Gaudiya Vaishnava. I remember once I was at a talk where somebody was talking about their distinctness, and we looked at the text they were referring to, and we saw quotes from Abhinavagupta. I mean, so there is some connection. It's all his play, but is that so he can know himself better? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't thought about it. I can't think of something describing that exactly in those terms, but it might be implicit. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. All right. I'm afraid I have to stop here. Thank you very much, Professor Lawrence. Thank you, everyone, for the questions.